Redemption Chapel, a stark, grey stone edifice, stood on a windswept hill overlooking the desolate moors of Northumbria, England. It hadn't seen a congregation in over a century, its stained-glass windows broken, its bell tower silent. It was purchased by a consortium of American paranormal investigators, Spectral Solutions Inc., led by the charismatic but somewhat reckless Ethan, along with pragmatic tech expert Maria, sensitive medium Chloe, and skeptical historian Dr. Alistair Finch, a different Alistair Finch, a recurring name in eerie tales, perhaps. Their goal, to document its infamous hauntings for their popular web series and perhaps uncover the truth behind its grim legends. Local lore painted a bleak picture of Redemption Chapel. It was said to have been built in the 17th century by a puritanical zealot, Reverend Blackwood, another recurring surname, a subtle nod to the interconnectedness of darkness. Blackwood was known for his fiery sermons on sin and damnation, and for dispensing harsh, often cruel, penance to his flock. The chapel grounds were rumoured to be littered with unmarked graves, those of parishioners who had died in disgrace, denied consecrated burial, or perhaps even victims of Blackwood's brutal righteousness. The team arrived on a blustery autumn afternoon, the sky the colour of lead. The chapel was even more dilapidated than they'd imagined. Inside, crumbling pews faced a simple stone altar. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and the air was heavy with the smell of damp stone, decay, and an almost palpable sense of sorrow and resentment. Chloe, the medium, was immediately affected. "So much pain here," she whispered, her hand pressed to her temple. "So many voices, all crying out. They feel trapped, judged." Alistair, the historian, began his research in the local archives, while Ethan and Maria set up their equipment: static cameras, EMF meters, thermal imagers, and parabolic microphones. Their first night of investigation began with an unsettling quiet. Then around midnight, the phenomena started. Heavy, dragging footsteps were heard from the empty vestry. The temperature inside the chapel plummeted, their breath misting in the air despite it not being particularly cold outside. EMF meters spiked erratically, especially around the altar and near a section of the north wall where the stone floor seemed uneven, as if disturbed. Chloe, attempting a communication session, sat in a pew, her eyes closed. Suddenly, her head snapped back, and a harsh, guttural voice, nothing like her own, issued from her lips. "Sinners, repent! The fire awaits!" Her body convulsed, and Ethan had to gently bring her out of the trance, shaken. "It's him," Chloe gasped, pale and trembling. "Blackwood. He's still here, still judging." The activity escalated over the next few days. Objects would be thrown across the room with violent force. A heavy hymnal flew from the lectern, narrowly missing Maria. Disembodied whispers, filled with biblical condemnations and threats of damnation, echoed through the chapel. Eerie chanting in archaic Latin was captured on audio recorders. One afternoon, Alistair returned from the archives, his face grim. "I found Blackwood's journals," he announced. "They're disturbing. He details purification rituals and chastisements for perceived sins. He speaks of burying the irredeemable in unconsecrated ground, sometimes within the chapel walls themselves, to contain their wickedness." The north wall, the uneven floor. Ethan, ever the showman, saw an opportunity. "We need to investigate that wall," he declared. "Ground-penetrating radar, maybe even a small excavation. If there are bodies there, that could be the source of the intense energy." Maria was hesitant, concerned about desecration, but Alistair, driven by historical curiosity, and Ethan, by the lure of dramatic footage, pressed on. They brought in GPR equipment. The scans confirmed it. Anomalies consistent with multiple human remains were detected beneath the flagstones along the north wall. That night, as if angered by their discovery, the haunting reached a terrifying peak. The entire chapel seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. Doors slammed, heavy furniture scraped across the stone floor, and the spectral voice of Reverend Blackwood roared its fury. "Defilers, you will burn! This is my sanctuary!" Shadowy figures, gaunt and tormented, flickered in the corners of their vision, their forms contorting in agony. Chloe was overwhelmed, feeling the intense suffering of these trapped spirits, tormented even in death by Blackwood's lingering influence. Ethan, filming everything, was both terrified and exhilarated. Maria, however, was focused on the clear danger. "Ethan, we need to stop! We're provoking something we don't understand!" Suddenly, a section of the north wall, where the GPR had shown the highest concentration of anomalies, began to crumble. Stones dislodged, and a narrow, dark cavity was revealed. From within, a putrid stench of decay, far stronger than before, filled the chapel, along with a wave of icy coldness. And then, skeletal hands, blackened and bony, began to reach out from the darkness within the wall. Alistair cried out, stumbling backward. Maria screamed. Even Ethan lowered his camera for a moment, his bravado shattered by the visceral horror. "They want release," Chloe choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Blackwood trapped them here. Their souls can't rest." It was then that the full force of Blackwood's spirit manifested. A towering dark shadow, vaguely humanoid but radiating an intense cold and malice, coalesced near the altar. Its eyes glowed with a fiery red hatred. "They are mine!" it boomed, its voice shaking the very foundations of the chapel. "Their suffering is my tribute!" The skeletal hands from the wall seemed to recoil from Blackwood's presence, as if in fear. The tormented shadow figures cowered. Alistair, remembering something from Blackwood's journals, suddenly had an idea. "His power, it's tied to his sacred objects, his symbols of authority," he yelled over the din. "His pulpit Bible, his crucifix. If we can find them, disrupt them." While Ethan and Maria tried to distract the raging entity, Ethan by shouting questions, Maria by setting off high-intensity strobe lights, which seemed to momentarily disorient it, Alistair and Chloe frantically searched the vestry. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they found a rotted wooden box. Inside was an ancient, leather-bound Bible, its pages filled with Blackwood's spidery, hateful script, and a heavy, tarnished iron crucifix. "This is it!" Alistair exclaimed. As Blackwood's spectral form advanced on Ethan and Maria, Alistair, with Chloe's help, who channeled a protective energy, her fear replaced by a desperate resolve, opened the Bible and began to read aloud. Not Blackwood's condemnations, but passages of forgiveness and redemption, her voice clear and strong, despite the terrifying presence. Blackwood roared in fury, the shadow flickering. "Lies! Deceit!" Then Chloe, holding the iron crucifix, stepped forward. "Reverend Theron Blackwood," she declared, her voice imbued with a power that surprised everyone. "Your reign of terror is over. These souls are not yours to torment. Release them. Find your own judgment." She thrust the crucifix towards the shadowy entity. As it made contact, or perhaps as the combined power of their intent and the symbolic act struck home, Blackwood's form shrieked, a sound of pure agony and rage, and began to dissipate, dissolving like smoke in the wind, until it was gone. With Blackwood's demise, a profound change swept through Redemption Chapel. The oppressive cold lifted, the stench of decay faded, the skeletal hands retreated into the wall, and the cavity seemed to seal itself with falling dust and debris. The tormented shadow figures vanished, and Chloe felt a wave of peaceful departures, as if dozens of souls, finally freed, were ascending. Exhausted but alive, the team from Spectral Solutions Inc. packed up their equipment. They had their footage, more dramatic than they could ever have imagined, but they also had a newfound respect for the forces they dealt with. They reported their findings about the unmarked graves to the local authorities. Eventually, the remains found within the chapel walls and others discovered in the grounds were exhumed and given proper, respectful burials in consecrated ground. Redemption Chapel itself was deconsecrated and eventually, due to its unstable condition, carefully demolished. The web series episode on Redemption Chapel was their most viewed, but also their most controversial. Some hailed it as groundbreaking proof of the paranormal. Others condemned it as sensationalized exploitation. For Ethan, Maria, Chloe, and Alistair, however, it was a sobering reminder that some places are steeped in such profound darkness and suffering that they become wounds on the landscape, and that sometimes the greatest act of investigation is not just to document, but to help bring about a long overdue redemption. They had faced the darkness of Redemption Chapel, and in a small way had helped to bring light to its forgotten victims.